During the Second World War, in the German concentration camp at Auschwitz, there was a young lady by the name of Ella Blumenthal. She was facing the inevitable, the gas chamber, and a painful death. Her little niece, Roma, walked up to her one day and said, "Why don't we just fling ourselves against the electrified fence so that death comes in an instant and we spare ourselves the torture and the pain?" Ella took her little niece close to her and said, "My dear, can we wait for one more day?" And Roma said yes. The next day when she returned, Ella said to her again, "My dear, can we make it one more day?" And then day after day after day, Ella kept coaxing her to wait for just one more day. Today, Ella is 103 years old. She is a Holocaust survivor only because she refused to give up. She swore that she would live. Now, what could be more terrifying and more frightening than a Holocaust? And Ella proved to us that endings need not be endings. They could be fresh beginnings. Having said that, let me try and recount some years of my life, 40 to 50 years back, and try and illustrate how I negotiated some of the so-called dead ends of life. Traditionally, I should have been in a chemical research lab or a medical practitioner. After all, a Tam Ram, it's a given that he would be in the sciences. And what was that conspiracy of nature that made me wean into the arts instead of the sciences, and I had a scientific bent mind? Well, that was a Hamletian question that was posed to be. Would I be an artist or a scientist? That's when someone asked me, who do you think is a greater entity, the artist or the scientist? You see, the scientist deduces everything mathematically. His equation goes in one straight line, while the artist has to keep his or her eyes and ears open 360 degrees. There may be no logic. There may be no book of rules. Just a flight of imagination, where you create, where you observe, where you make statements that could be relevant and useful to society. So, here I was trying to turn a childhood obsession into a profession. And although I graduated in the sciences, I found myself on the editorial board of a scientific journal called Chemical Age of India, not knowing where to reach out to fulfill my desires in the artistic field. But then, like they say, when you find yourself in a black hole, in a dark hole, don't consider yourself buried. Consider yourself planted. Because right below the offices of the Chemical Age of India, right down, there was a film preview theatre called the Blaze Minuet, where the who's who of the film industry used to walk in. Producers, directors, distributors, actors, critics, to watch the latest films. And that is where I ran into the doyen of journalism, publicity, advertising, and script writing, Mr. V.P. Sathe, who incidentally was also the right-hand man of Mr. Raj Kapoor. And the next day I found myself employed in this advertising agency, Bombay Publicity, as a copywriter, dealing predominantly with cinema. Bombay Publicity was the sugar bowl, as they called it, the networking area of film producers, directors, actors, and distributors. And that is where I took my first chance, trying to network with all of them and telling them that I'd like to be an actor. They scoffed at me. They mocked me. They laughed at me. They ignored me. They thought I was joking. But I didn't let that defeat my purpose. I didn't let that create a self-doubt. If at all, it only motivated me and created an attitude in me called perseverance. Like they say, it's all about being at the right place at the right time. There was a film launch party which I very reluctantly attended with Mr. V.B. Sathe. And I ran into a theatre director who gave me my first entry into professional theatre at the Prithvi Theatre. I started my theatre performances. They went on for 10 years without being paid a rupee. But like we all say, that's what we call investing time and energy in something that would build your future. They say that even luck needs a chance, destiny needs an opportunity. And that came my way when I took my chances with a new medium called sponsored television in India. My theatre experience held me in good stead. And I worked with some of the finest filmmakers in India. Sai Paranjpe, Rishikesh Mukherjee, Bashu Chatterjee, M.S. Satyu, Gulzar, Yash Chopra, Anand Mahindra, Sridhar Shivsagar, so many of them. They created some very popular shows like Ados Fados, Ghar Jamai, The Sword of Tipu Sultan, and so many others, which helped me carve for myself a niche in the performing industry. My television and theatre had a domino effect. They resulted in my introduction into cinema. And would you believe it, not in my wildest dreams did I ever feel that I would one day work with the great Sir Peter O'Toole. There I was sitting in front of him in Jodhpur, working out a few scenes from Rudyard Kipling's novel Kim, which was a British film. There was no money. The role was very small, but it enriched my performance. And that was the time when I had to take a very hard decision. If I had to be known as a performer, a regular performer, and not just a weekend performer in theatre, I had to take a very harsh decision of quitting my job. And believe you me, it was tough to leave the place which gave birth to me as an actor. But I had to because I was beckoned to Mysore for 2 years to work in a series called The Sword of Tipu Sultan. The day I landed in Mysore, the set went up in flames. It was the worst tragedy in the history of cinema. More than 80 people died. I was back home in Mumbai, shattered, shaken, traumatized, and unemployed because I had quit my job. Was I getting into a black hole all over again? Was I getting into that dark space that I had escaped with so much difficulty? There was only one way out: patience and perseverance. 6 months later, they revived The Sword of Tipu Sultan. We went to Jaipur, and what I would consider my most rewarding part in 45 years of my career, the role of Purnaya Pandit in The Sword of Tipu Sultan. But then it taught me one harsh lesson. Whatever the failures, whatever the disasters, whatever the rejections, One had to hang on in there. And now came the time when I had to make a logical progression. As you can see, it was from theater to television to films, what we call some kind of a graduation. And education was the key. I had to educate myself in the arts. So I watched all great masters from all over the world, whether it was from Europe, the Americas, Asia, Latin America. I watched the works of people like Bergman, Truffaut, Fellini, Vittorio De Sica, Hitchcock, Kurosawa, Tarkovsky, and our very own Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen, Ritwik Ghatak, Adur Gopal Krishnan, Arvindan, Girish Kasravalli. And what I realized as a film society buff, watching all these films on the big screen, was that the language that these masters spoke was of global cinema. It was light years ahead of what we recognize as cinema in the Hindi film industry. And that was where the blockade started. Would I ever be a filmmaker who would address a global audience? Would I ever be a filmmaker who would speak an international language of cinema? And that's when I realized that in order to reach out to the great waters of the sea or the ocean, the brook had to pass through marshy, muddy land. I compromised. I had to make mainstream cinema, albeit with all the aesthetics that I knew, in order to make myself known in the film industry. And after a couple of films, I realized that I couldn't let my education be wasted. I made an experimental film at a modest cost of 30 lakhs. Providentially, it was noticed by a conglomerate who released the film in cinemas, and that was a shot in the arm, a confidence that I so badly needed to address global cinema. And I made real cinema, non-fiction, which was actually stranger than fiction, my mojo. I went into real stories like an Andhra farmer getting caught between the rebels, the Naxal rebels, and the cops. I explored the life of a woman who tried to take her own life twice and then decided that giving a life was more important than taking a life. She picked up abandoned infants from the street and gave them shelter. Sindhutai Subka. I explored the irony of a freedom fighter who fought most of his childhood years as a freedom fighter along with Gandhiji, and then spent 35 years of his life fighting for a freedom fighter's certificate from the Indian government. I looked at the life of a mother who fought for 13 years to get justice for her son, who was killed in police custody, tortured in police custody. I looked at the harrowing life of women sugarcane workers who were forced into the horrific ritual of hysterectomy, the removal of the uterus, in India's richest sugarcane belt. I looked at the lives of a healthy couple, senior couple, who appealed to the President of India to make active euthanasia legal so that they did not end up on an operating table or on a ventilator. These were the kind of films I was trying to make and trying to convince funders and producers to back me. A lot of them thought that these themes were absolutely overwhelming. They said they were fabulous. They even came to watch my experimental film. And one prominent producer even told me, "You know what? I like to watch these films, not make them." And there I was trying to fight a battle for trying to get Indian cinema on the international arena. Every time I made a film, I did not know where my next rupee would come from. But I guess someone up there likes me, because in the last 15 years, I actually ended up making 15 international projects. All of them have been to international festivals, have been accorded national and state awards, and have been applauded around the world. There were some kind souls who just turned up out of the blue and helped me make these films. But I realize, and I still realize today, that this can't go on forever. In fact, I would say that what you see in front of you could be a miracle of sorts, who has achieved something against all odds. Today, I wonder where my next rupee for my next film will come from. The scene is quite hazy. The corporate studios want you to actually give them a return of investment rather than the kind of films that I would like to make. The creativity of cinema does not meet the commerce of cinema. And I'm fighting my battles all over again. I also realize that it's a certain kind of ignorance that has led to this mess that we have created for ourselves. We need to be cinema literate, both the funders and the audience. But most of the time, when we end up making cinema, succumbing to the temptation of making popular, banal formula films, we actually end up drugging the audience. There is a niche audience, a very minority of the audience that would want to watch cinema that is cerebral. And that is the audience I'm trying to develop. I'm trying to reach out. So today, I keep telling myself, like Ella Blumenthal said in the concentration camp, one more day, just another day. And you list to it. Actually, there are no endings. There are only beginnings. So let's not make a mystery of it. Let's find the purpose for our lives. Let's make it fruitful, not futile. Thank you. I will end my statement here. So, shall we begin?